The valley was the kind of place that made you believe in ghosts. Not because anything supernatural had ever happened there, but because the silence was so complete, so absolute, that it felt like the land itself had given up on sound. No insects chirped. No wind moved through the sparse scrub. Even the dust seemed to settle without noise. Lieutenant Commander Derek Hayes raised a closed fist, and 6 men froze where they stood, mid-stride, weapons up, eyes scanning. Through his night vision optics, the compound ahead looked like every other abandoned structure in this part of the world. Corrugated metal patched over rusted frames, bullet-scarred concrete walls that told old stories in their pockmarked surfaces, deep shadows pooling in corners where anything could be hiding. Their intelligence packet had called this sector clean. The encryption keys stolen from a NATO communications hub were reportedly inside that compound. Their job was straightforward. Get in, locate the keys, get out. Light footprint. No air cover. No quick reaction force within 30 minutes of their position. Intelligence, Hayes had learned over 15 years of special operations work, was often the first thing to die in hostile territory. The shooting started without warning. The first burst of automatic fire seemed to come from everywhere at once. East, north, the rooftop of a structure Hayes hadn't even fully registered. He threw himself behind a low crumbling wall as rounds chewed through the space where his head had been half a second before. Petty Officer Jake Morrison, his radio operator, hit the dirt beside him, already talking into his handset, his voice tight but controlled. Contact. Multiple hostiles. East and north. We need support. Tracer rounds painted brief red lines through the darkness like angry signals from the underworld. Hayes forced himself to slow down, to count muzzle flashes the way he'd been trained. 7, maybe 8. Coordinated fire, not random shooting. Someone had planned this ambush. They knew exactly where the SEAL team would be moving, exactly which angles would create overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a trap. Corpsman Ryan Walsh crawled up beside Hayes through the gravel, his medical pack scraping stone, his face tight with the kind of controlled fear that experienced operators learn to use as fuel. So, they've got us bracketed. We need to move or we're dead where we sit. Hayes knew it. The wall they sheltered behind was already crumbling under sustained fire, chunks of concrete exploding into powder, the structure itself dying around them. He was calculating vectors, timing his team's movement, when a crack split the air, a different sound entirely. Heavier, more deliberate, a large-caliber rifle firing from somewhere outside their perimeter. An enemy gunner tumbled from a rooftop 50 meters to the north. The man had been lining up a careful shot on Hayes' position. Now he was gone. Silence stretched across the next 2 heartbeats. Who fired? Hayes demanded, scanning his team in the darkness. Every weapon in his unit was oriented toward the compound. None of them had taken that shot. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, their lead breacher, was already scanning the ridgeline to the west through his spotting scope. His voice came back hushed, almost reverent. That came from outside our perimeter, sir. Way outside. Then another shot rang out, the same heavy, rolling boom echoing off the valley walls. A second enemy fighter dropped, this one from a window position that had been pinning down Hayes' left flank. Then a third, a fourth, each one precise, each one eliminating a threat that had been invisible to Hayes' team. The enemy fire faltered, became disorganized, and then died entirely. Whoever was shooting wasn't simply accurate. They were surgical. Hayes swept his thermal optic across the western ridgeline and stopped cold. A small thermal signature, barely a flicker of warmth against the cooling rocks, 900 meters distant. Elevated, prone, perfectly positioned to see the entire valley floor. Eyes on, he whispered. Single individual. West Ridge. Webb confirmed it through his scope, then went very quiet for a moment. So, that's a woman. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Through the spotting optic, Hayes watched the distant figure shift slightly. A gloved hand lifted into view and moved in deliberate, careful patterns against the night sky. Not random motion, but structured communication. Tactical sign language. The meaning was unmistakable even at this distance. Move east. Now. Hayes had exactly 3 seconds to make a decision. stay behind a crumbling wall that was slowly being destroyed around them, or trust an unknown shooter who had just eliminated 4 enemy combatants with 4 rounds and was now directing their movement like she owned the entire valley. "We move," he said. "Webb on point. Morrison, keep working that radio. Everyone else, watch for secondaries." They slipped east through a narrow wadi that hadn't shown up clearly on the satellite imagery. Natural cover, invisible from the compound, exactly the kind of route an operator with intimate knowledge of the terrain would know about. As they moved, Hayes kept glancing back at the ridge. The thermal signature remained absolutely still. Overwatch position maintained. Professional. Whoever this person was, she understood cover and movement at a level that spoke of serious training. 200 meters out, Hayes risked a look back through his scope. The ridge was empty. No heat signature, no movement, nothing but rocks and cooling air. She had vanished as cleanly as if she'd never existed. But where she'd been lying, the thermal view picked out 2 things: the distinctive impression of bipod leaves in soft ground, and a single ejected brass casing gleaming in the dark. Hayes studied the size of that casing. Barrett M82A1, if his experience meant anything. .50 caliber. Effective range up to 1,800 meters in the right hands. Those had been the right hands. Morrison's voice was still laced with adrenaline. "Sir, are we clear?" Hayes lowered his scope and looked toward the eastern route their mysterious benefactor had indicated. "For now. But someone just saved our lives, and I intend to find out who." ****. The safe house was 12 kilometers south, a mud brick structure indistinguishable from every other building in the district. Inside, the SEAL team stripped their gear in the methodical silence that follows combat. Weapons cleared and set aside, ammunition inventoried, the gradual release of a tension that had been wound tight as a watch spring. Hayes sat at a folding table with a tablet displaying footage from the passive surveillance drone that had been circling at high altitude throughout the engagement. Too high to intervene, but close enough to record everything. He scrubbed backward through the timeline. He found what he was looking for. The compound had been empty before the ambush. Completely empty. The enemy had been waiting outside their perimeter the entire time, moving into position after the SEAL team committed to their approach. A deliberate, professionally constructed trap. Then the shooting. Then the unknown sniper on the western ridge. And 4 shots in 37 seconds that changed everything. "Run facial recognition on our shooter," Hayes said to Morrison. "Already tried, sir. Thermal degradation at that range makes it impossible," and she never looked directly at the drone. Morrison pulled up another window. "But I ran ballistics analysis on the engagement. Point of impact, point of origin, bullet drop, atmospheric conditions. She's shooting him 33 ball or better. That's not civilian ammunition, sir. That's military grade." Webb had been working his own angle, pulling casualty assessments from local intelligence sources. He set his phone down on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man who's just found something significant. "All 4 targets are confirmed kills. Every single one a headshot." He paused. "There's something else. I know that ridge." "Devil's Tooth," Hayes said, remembering it from the map. "Yes, sir. 3 years ago, a Marine Scout sniper team used that exact position during Operation Sandstorm. They got compromised. The whole unit was killed." Webb was scrolling through old mission briefs he'd saved on his phone, a habit some operators developed, maintaining their own archive of operational history. Mostly male, but one wasn't. He held up the phone. A service photo filled the screen. A young woman, mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back regulation tight, eyes that looked through the camera rather than at it. The kind of eyes that had already been places most people never go. First Lieutenant Arya Lang, Marine Corps Scout sniper. She was listed as spotter on the team, but by all accounts she could outshoot her partner. Her teammates called her Spectre because of her technique. She'd fire in the space between heartbeats. 0 movement. 0 disturbance. Perfect shots. What happened to her? Hayes asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. Webb's expression darkened. Official report says she died with the rest of her team. Indirect fire. No remains recovered. He set the phone down. But the locals tell a different story. They say one Marine walked away from that ridge. Wounded. Alone. That Marine has been operating in these mountains ever since. Operating how? Guardian. Protecting American patrols. Eliminating high-value targets. Then disappearing. What met Hayes' eyes? Most guys think it's just a ghost story. Something passed around to boost morale when things get bad. Hayes turned back to the tablet. The frozen frame showed the empty ridge, the perfect sight lines, the multiple egress routes. The work of a professional who also happened to know the terrain like her own reflection. I think, he said slowly, that we just met the ghost. *****. The next evening, the team returned to the valley. During the day, they had prepared carefully. They studied every topographic detail of the terrain surrounding Devil's Tooth Ridge. They reviewed Marine Corps protocols for isolated snipers, standardized emergency communication methods, light signals, specific radio frequencies that change based on date and grid coordinates, the kind of system designed so that a Marine cut off from command could still speak to friendly forces without exposing themselves. If Arya Lang was still thinking like a Marine, and everything about those 4 shots suggested she would know these protocols. They positioned themselves 500 meters south of the thermal signature's previous location, close enough to be noticed, far enough to avoid appearing threatening. Morrison set up a portable military-grade LED signal light and began transmitting the Marine Corps distress pattern, modified with current authentication codes. Then they waited. The desert wind carried dust and the faint chemical smell of creosote. Hayes scanned the ridge through thermal optics and found nothing but cooling rock and scattered scrub vegetation. 5 minutes. 10. 15. From the ridge line, a single brief pulse of light answered them. "She's there," Webb breathed beside him. Morrison adjusted the signal light and transmitted again. "Friendly. Request contact. Urgent." The response took longer this time. When it finally came, Morrison had to decode it twice before he believed what it said. "She says, why?" Hayes took the light himself and composed a message. He chose each word with care. "Need help. Enemy strong. Many lost." The ridge stayed dark so long he thought she'd gone. Then a new pattern emerged, slower and more deliberate than before. "Not your war," Morrison translated quietly. "Leave while you can." Hayes felt the weight of those 3 words. She was telling them to run. After 3 years alone in these mountains, she had learned something about this place that made even a Marine, even someone with her demonstrated skill and resilience, tell other soldiers to give up and go home. He signaled back, "We don't leave brothers behind. That includes you." The response was immediate, sharp, almost angry in its quick flashes. "I'm already dead," Morrison said, his voice going quiet. "Go home." Hayes set down the signal light. He picked up his rifle and switched on the weapon-mounted infrared laser, invisible to the naked eye, but blazing bright through night vision equipment. He pointed it at the ground in front of his position and moved it with careful deliberateness, spelling out 3 words in light. "Semper Fidelis." Always faithful. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure rose on the ridge. Hayes could barely make her out through his optics. Thin, dressed in layers of desert camouflage that blended with the rock, smaller than he'd somehow expected. She raised one hand. The salute was slow and formal and carried in it something Hayes couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or grief, or the simple muscle memory of a person who had been a Marine every day of the past 3 years regardless of what any official record claimed. Then she was gone. But where she had stood, a faint heat signature remained in the shape of an arrow pointing northwest. "She's not asking us to leave," Hayes said. "She's telling us where to go." *****. 3 years earlier, Arya Lang had believed in the mission the way most young officers do, completely and without reservation. She had believed in her training, in her teammates, in the chain of command that was supposed to keep them all alive. She had believed that if you did everything correctly, followed every protocol, trusted the people above you, you would come home. Devil's Tooth Ridge had dismantled those beliefs one mortar round at a time. She'd been 26, the youngest Marine in her Scout sniper class and the first woman to earn an operational sniper slot. Her spotter, Sergeant Kyle Reeves, was a veteran of 8 deployments who could read terrain the way other people read text. Their team leader, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had long since made peace with the most difficult parts of this work. Corporal James Washington served as their security element and radio operator, the youngest of them at 23, who still managed to find something to laugh about in almost any situation. They'd inserted on a Tuesday. Reeves had joked about it being Taco Tuesday back at the Chow Hall while they ate MREs on a frozen mountain instead. Washington had laughed at that for a full minute. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. Establish an observation post overlooking a valley where a high-value target was reportedly meeting with Iranian weapons suppliers. Observe, document, extract. 7 to 2 hours. In and out. 36 hours into their observation, Washington's radio lit up with enemy traffic. Someone had given away their position. Not approximately, exactly, down to the grid coordinate. Chen had requested immediate extraction. The weather was deteriorating rapidly. A massive sandstorm building from the west. Command denied the request. Hold position and evade contact until the storm passes. The mortars started falling 20 minutes later. Arya could still hear those sounds in her sleep. The distant thump of a tube firing, the ascending whistle that lasted just long enough to understand what was coming, and then the world collapsing into fire and pressure and silence. Chen died in the first barrage. Washington took shrapnel through his chest and kept talking into his radio, kept calling for help that wasn't coming. Reeves dragged them both behind a rock formation and fought with everything he had while the enemy came up both slopes of the ridge in coordinated teams. They had done this before. They had practiced surrounding Americans on high ground and picking them off from multiple angles. Arya. Reeves's voice had been calm even then, blood running freely from a wound above his eye. There's a cave system on the northeast face. You need to go. Not without. That is a direct order, Lieutenant. He had pressed his dog tags into her hand. His and Washington's and Chen's. Tell them we held. Tell them we didn't break. She had watched him stand up and walk his rifle fired deliberately across the advancing enemy line, buying her seconds, burning the last of what he had to give. She had crawled and stumbled and half-fallen into the narrow cave entrance as gunfire echoed behind her. When the silence finally came, she tried to go back. The ridge was swarming with enemy fighters. Trucks. Spotlights. Enough men to search every shadow on the mountain. She had called for extraction on the emergency frequency. A radio operator finally responded and told her to stay hidden, that help was coming. She had waited 3 days in those caves with almost no water, treating the shrapnel wound in her side with what little remained in her medical kit. No help came. On the 4th day, she listened to her own death announced on the radio. All personnel presumed killed in action. Memorial services pending. That was when Arya Lang understood what had really happened. Someone had sold their position. Someone in the chain of command had decided 4 Marines were an acceptable price for something. Politics, money, a favor to someone who needed that high-value target meeting to proceed undisturbed. And if she walked back into a forward operating base asking questions about how the enemy had known exactly where to find her team, she would be a loose end in someone's carefully constructed story. So she stayed dead instead. She learned the terrain by living in it. She learned fragments of Pashto from cautious contact with local civilians who had their own complicated reasons for occasionally helping a ghost soldier they barely understood. She scavenged equipment from abandoned positions and supply caches. She treated her injuries with veterinary supplies from remote villages. For the first year, she avoided every American patrol she spotted, terrified that someone had sent them specifically to find her and ensure she stayed quiet permanently. Then she had seen a young soldier bleeding out alone, with enemy fighters closing in on 3 sides, calling for his mother into a radio that wasn't answering. The shot had been simple. 700 meters, no wind, stationary target. She had made the kill and disappeared before anyone could locate her position. But something fundamental had shifted. She had a mission now. Not the one command had assigned her, but the one she had given herself. No more Marines would die alone in these mountains if she could prevent it. No more families would receive folded flags over empty caskets. She became Spectre again. Not a person, a function, a shot that arrived from nowhere when it was needed most. *****. The village of Carmen sat in a shallow depression where two valleys converged, and in daylight it looked like 100 other rural settlements throughout the district. At night, observed through thermal optics from a kilometer out, it told a completely different story. Hayes counted at least 20 armed individuals moving through the village in organized patterns, not the random movement of civilians, but the purposeful circulation of people maintaining defensive positions and security rotations. Technical vehicles were concealed in the compounds, heavy weapons mounted, radio traffic flooding multiple frequencies. He was planning a closer reconnaissance approach when his peripheral vision registered movement 10 meters away. She had come from downwind, using the terrain so perfectly that none of his team had detected her approach. If she had wanted them dead, they would already be dead, a fact that Hayes filed carefully in the part of his mind that evaluated threats. Arya Lang looked like she had been assembled from the desert itself. Her clothing was a laid patchwork of salvaged military gear and local fabric, everything chosen and positioned to blend with rock and sand in a way that spoke of years spent perfecting the craft of invisibility. Her face was lean and deeply weathered, darkened by years of high-altitude sun, marked by a scar that ran from her left temple across her cheekbone. Her hands, resting near but not on her weapons, were steady. Her eyes were the only thing Hayes recognized from her service photo. That same penetrating blue, the same quality of looking through things rather than at them. But behind that quality now lived a weariness that no training course had ever put there. She carried her Barrett M82A1 with the casual ease of someone who had long since stopped thinking of it as an object and started thinking of it as a part of herself. Nobody moved. The desert held its breath. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. Her voice was rough, as if she'd used it very little lately. "We don't leave people behind," Hayes said carefully. "That includes Marines who've been operating alone for 3 years. I'm not a Marine anymore. I'm dead. Remember? You're alive and you're here. That makes you a Marine." Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile, but the memory of one. Then she turned toward the village below. "The enemy is planning a convoy ambush. Route Phoenix. Day after tomorrow. They have the convoy manifest, the troop strength, the exact timing." She paused. "Someone in your command structure has been feeding them intelligence." The words hit like a physical strike. Hayes kept his voice professional. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been listening for 3 years. I speak enough Pashto to follow their radio traffic. I know which frequencies your command uses and which ones leak to the enemy." Her voice carried no emotion, just the flat precision of someone reporting observed facts. "I've stopped 12 ambushes in the past year alone. You never knew because the attacks never happened." Webb made a sound that might have been a suppressed oath. 12 ambushes. Dozens of soldiers who were alive right now without any idea how close they'd come. "You're one of them," Arias said to Hayes. "That ambush 2 nights ago was designed to kill your entire team. The encryption keys you were looking for were already on their way to Iran before you were even briefed. You were sent to die for nothing, to cover up the fact that those keys were sold, not stolen." Hayes felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're telling me our mission was compromised from the start?" "Not compromised. Designed." Her eyes moved to the village. "That's the real operation down there. Not just a staging area, a distribution hub. Intelligence, weapons, money. All of it flows through Carmen. The local elder, a man named Rashid Ahmadi, coordinates everything. He presents himself as a civilian leader. He coordinates every enemy operation in this region." "Why are you telling us this now?" Morrison asked. "After 3 years, why come forward now?" Arya was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was the most unguarded it had been since she'd appeared. "Because you came back. Because you signaled me with the motto and didn't pretend it was tactical." She looked at Hayes. "And because I'm tired of watching people die for someone's profit while I stand on a ridge and count bodies." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The cave system was more extensive than Hayes had expected. A network of chambers connected by narrow passages, ventilated in ways that allowed small fires without visible smoke above the ridge. The walls of the main chamber held years of carefully maintained supplies, ammunition crates stacked with military precision, medical equipment, both military issue and improvised, water containers, food stocks that had clearly been rationed and rotated on a disciplined schedule. One chamber held something else entirely. Photographs covered the entire back wall, hundreds of them, connected by strings in different colors that mapped relationships and timelines. Maps overlaid the photographs, marked with enemy positions, patrol routes, safe house locations, names in multiple languages. A battered laptop ran from a solar panel array outside the cave entrance, its screen displaying decrypted radio intercepts. Hayes stood in the entrance of that room for a long moment before he could speak. 3 years, Arias said from behind him. I stayed sane by staying busy. And unlike official intelligence packages, mine isn't filtered through people who might want certain things hidden. She walked them through it systematically. Ahmadi's logistics network. A communications specialist called Tariq, who was a linchpin of the enemy's encrypted radio system. A weapons dealer operating under the name Hassan, who moved supplies across the Pakistani border. And then the American. The photograph was grainy, taken at extreme range, but it clearly showed a Western male in expensive clothing. The kind of expensive that looked wrong against a backdrop of remote mountain terrain, meeting with Ahmadi near the border. The exchange was brief, a package in each direction, less than 5 minutes, and then both men gone in different vehicles. Gerald Brennan, Arias said, formerly Special Forces, now contracted to a private military company called Sentinel Solutions. They provide security consultation to embassy personnel, which means he has access to classified information and the institutional protection that comes with diplomatic adjacency. She pulled down a second photograph. This one showed Brennan again, but this time his companion wore American military uniform. Rank insignia visible even at distance. Colonel Marcus Vaughn, Arias said, Task Force Commander, oversees most special operations in this sector. I have a meeting with Brennan 6 times in the past year. Always off base. Always in locations they believe are unobserved. The silence that followed was different from the silence of the desert. This one had weight. Hayes looked at the photographs for a long time. Vaughn was the officer who had approved their mission. Vaughn was the one who had assured them the sector was clear, that the encryption keys were in that compound, that they were going in light because the intelligence picture was favorable. Vaughn had sent them into a kill zone with full knowledge of what was waiting there. 15 American deaths, Arias said quietly. That's what I've been able to confirm. Missions that should have succeeded but didn't, because someone who knew the operational details told the enemy exactly when and where to be waiting. We need to bring this to Theater Command, Chen said. And tell them what? Aria's voice was patient, without bitterness. She had already worked through the emotions attached to this problem years ago and was now dealing only in logistics. That a dead Marine has been spying on a colonel for 3 years. They'll either believe I'm lying or they'll classify everything to protect the institution from a scandal. Either way, Vaughn and Brennan keep operating and soldiers keep dying. Then we don't just bring evidence, Hayes said slowly. He was quiet for a moment, turning something over in his mind. We give them something they can't dismiss. We catch them in the act. The convoy, Morrison said immediately. The convoy, Hayes confirmed. We'll let the attack happen long enough to document that it was real, that the intelligence behind it was real, and that the information flow ran from Vaughn to Brennan to Ahmadi. Then we stop it. Arya was shaking her head before he finished. You're talking about 40 soldiers as bait. We stop the ambush. We've done the math. Between your position and mine and Webb's team, we can neutralize every shooter in the first 30 seconds. The convoy troops will be warned of possible enemy activity, so they are alert and buttoned up. If we execute correctly, there are no casualties. He met her eyes. But we need you. You know this terrain. You know the enemy's tactics. And I need you to agree that after this is done, you come in with us. Something moved across her face, complex and private, the kind of internal calculation that happens when a person decides whether to trust again after trust has cost them everything. She straightened her shoulders. The gesture was pure Marine. All right, she said, but we do this my way. Asterisk. Morrison infiltrated close to Vaughn's headquarters compound at 2,200 hours, moving through the perimeter with the patience of someone who understood that speed and stealth are usually enemies. By midnight, he had tapped into the satellite uplink system. By 01:47 hours, he had what they needed. Hayes listened to the recording through his earpiece, lying prone on a rocky hillside with Arya Lang beside him, her eye to her scope, scanning the valley below. Vaughn's voice was almost casual on the recording. Route Phoenix. Convoy departure 0800. 40 personnel. 4 vehicles. Standard security protocol. Yes, exactly where we discussed. The route has been cleared through my office. No one will question it. A pause. Then, the payment will be the same as last time. Half now, half after confirmation. And Brennan, make sure your friends understand this is the last job for a while. Things are getting too hot. After this, we go quiet for 6 months. Hayes closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. That's treason, Arya said beside him. No inflection, no satisfaction. Just the clinical identification of a fact she had suspected for 3 years and was now hearing confirmed in the subject's own voice. Morrison, Hayes said quietly into his radio, tell me that's stored securely. Encrypted and uploaded to 3 separate servers, sir. Destroy every piece of equipment I own and the evidence still exists. Webb and Chen tracked Brennan from the city to a crumbling concrete checkpoint station near Carmen, where Amadi arrived in a second vehicle flanked by bodyguards. The exchange was unhurried and professional. A courier envelope containing the convoy details, money in American currency passed in return. Confirmation spoken clearly enough for the long-range directional microphone Webb had positioned during the afternoon. The entire meeting lasted 11 minutes. They had the full chain documented, so as to handle it to enemy leadership. And now they had 31 hours to prepare for the ambush itself. Arya was precise in her planning. She identified every enemy position at kilometer marker 47, the choke point where the road narrowed between 2 ridgelines, and assigned each position to a specific shooter. 4 for herself, 4 more between Webb and Chen, the remainder for Hayes and Brooks. She calculated distances, wind corridors, sight angles from every elevated position the enemy might use. The moment the first RPG launches, we engage, she said, her finger tracing the map. Every position neutralized within 30 seconds. The convoy troops will be taking cover, returning fire at positions that are already empty. No American casualties. And Vaughn and Brennan will have definitive proof that the ambush was real, because it was. Hayes thought about 40 men rolling down that road in 4 vehicles, their lives depending on 7 people and 1 plan executing perfectly. He thought about the weight of that, and about the alternative, which was doing nothing and watching the next ambush succeed. We start at 0800, he said. The convoy rolled out exactly on schedule. Hayes had warned the convoy commander, Army Captain Richards, of possible enemy activity on the route, just enough to ensure his troops were alert and prepared, not enough to reveal what was actually coming. Richards had nodded once and said nothing. Good commanders don't need the whole picture to act on a credible warning. At kilometer marker 47, the enemy was in position, 8 fighters on the north ridge, 5 on the south, all settled into prepared firing positions with confidence, all believing they were about to conduct another successful ambush against soldiers who had no idea what was waiting for them. The convoy entered the kill zone. The first RPG launched with a distinctive whoosh of smoke and fire. Richards had prepared for exactly this. His lead vehicle swerved hard right and the round detonated harmlessly against the rock wall behind it. Hayes said 1 word into his radio. Execute. Arya's Barrett spoke 4 times in rapid succession. 4 shots, 4 impacts, 4 enemy fighters down before anyone on the ridge could understand what was happening to them. She worked the bolt between each shot with the economy of motion that comes from 10,000 repetitions. Acquire, breathe, fire, cycle, acquire again. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Webb and Chen were firing simultaneously from the south ridge. Hayes took 2 targets from his position. Brooks covered the eastern approach. The entire engagement lasted 43 seconds. 13 enemy combatants eliminated. 0 American casualties. The convoy troops dismounted and returned fire at positions that were already empty, their rounds sparking harmlessly off rocks. In Amadi's communications with Brennan, captured by Morrison's monitoring equipment, the enemy leader was screaming about a catastrophic failure, demanding to know how the intelligence could have been wrong. It wasn't wrong. Something had changed the equation. Hayes moved to check on Arya and found her already breaking down her position, collecting her brass casings with practiced habit. Her hands were trembling slightly with adrenaline release. 4 more, she said quietly. 4 more men dead. How many does that make total? It wasn't really a question. Hayes answered it anyway. 4 men who would have killed 40. You made the right call. She nodded slowly, and he could see in her expression that knowing and believing were still 2 separate places for her, that they might remain 2 separate places for a long time. 3 years of righteous killing leaves marks that don't wash off easily. Commander Hayes. Captain Richards's voice came through the tactical frequency. I'd genuinely like to know what just happened. We were about to get hit hard, and then every hostile position just stopped existing. Guardian Angels, Captain, Hayes said. Recommend you continue your route. The area is clear. Tell your angels we owe them considerably more than drinks. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Colonel Marcus Vaughn moved faster than Hayes had expected. They were beginning to collect evidence from the ambush site when Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with a tone Hayes had heard before, the specific register of someone delivering news that changes everything. A quick reaction force had been dispatched from Vaughn's headquarters, ETA 20 minutes. Not dispatched to investigate a failed enemy ambush. Dispatched to contain what Vaughn's communications monitoring had apparently flagged as a rogue element operating in his sector. He wasn't sending soldiers to arrest them. The orders, as Morrison was now reading from intercepted traffic, were to neutralize the rogue element and destroy any evidence found. We run, Arya said immediately. She was already moving, throwing her gear together with the practiced speed of someone who had rehearsed this scenario many times. Theater command. We bypass Vaughn completely and deliver everything directly to someone above his authority. The nearest friendly base is 40 kilometers south, Webb said. They'll intercept us before we're halfway there. Then we don't go to a base. Arya's voice was steady. We go to the press. Brennan and Vaughn can silence military personnel. They cannot silence a published scandal. It was an extreme measure. Leaking classified information, even in service of exposing treason, was still a crime. Hayes thought about career implications, about the legal frameworks, about everything a 15-year naval career had taught him about the importance of working within the system. Then he thought about 15 dead soldiers and 40 more who had nearly joined them today. Morrison, can you transmit everything to civilian news organizations? Securely. Give me 5 minutes, sir. Those 5 minutes lasted forever. The sound of helicopter rotors was already audible in the distance when Morrison looked up and said, Upload complete. New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian. Military affairs correspondents at all 3 who can verify authenticity. It's out there now. It cannot be recalled. They were beginning to move toward the canyon escape route when the first mortar round fell. The detonation threw Hayes 10 feet backward. He hit the ground with his ears ringing and his vision strobing, and for a moment couldn't find up or down. Through the smoke, he registered that Morrison was down, badly. The radio operator's leg was nearly severed by shrapnel, blood soaking through his clothing with alarming speed. Brooks and Chen reached Morrison and began field medicine immediately. Webb established a suppressing fire position. Arya was gone. Hayes looked up and found her 60 meters away, moving toward the mortar crew's position in the open ground, using every fold in the terrain for cover, her M45 pistol in her hand, the Barrett abandoned, too large for this kind of close wake. She had calculated that the mortar crew would kill all of them before they could extract, and had made a decision in the space of a second. She reached the crew before they could fire again. 3 men. She gave each of them the absolute minimum of what was necessary and moved on. But as she withdrew, Vaughn's quick reaction force arrived and she was caught in the open. 2 bullets. 1 through her side, 1 through her shoulder. She went down hard. Hayes was already running. He reached her behind a rock outcropping, as his team laid down suppressing fire. Walsh, their corpsman, arrived seconds later and assessed the wounds with the grim efficiency of a man who had seen too many injuries not to recognize serious ones. Entry and exit on both wounds. Internal bleeding probable. She needed surgery in hours, not days. Then we get her to surgery, Hayes said. The next 30 minutes were the longest of his career. His team moved in tactical bounds through ground that was simultaneously trying to kill them and being used by Vaughan's forces to cut off their retreat. They carried Morrison and half-carried Arya, fighting in brief violent exchanges while Walsh did emergency medicine on the move. The canyon Arya had identified provided exactly what she'd promised, a natural choke point that forced pursuit into a fatal funnel. Webb and Brooks held the entrance while the rest of the team moved deeper into the system. "There's a tunnel," Arya whispered. Her lips had gone pale. 200 meters. Exits 5 kilometers south in a different valley. 3 years of preparing escape routes. Even now, even like this, she was thinking tactically. They found the tunnel and moved through it and emerged into a valley where Hayes used the highest priority codes in his arsenal to call for emergency extraction, codes that bypassed Vaughan's authority entirely and went directly to Theater Command. 2 Apache attack helicopters arrived first, clearing the airspace above them. Then the medevac. Then a command element led by a 2-star General Hayes had never met. As medics loaded Morrison and Arya onto stretchers, Hayes approached the general and placed a secure data drive in his hands. "Colonel Vaughn has been selling operational intelligence to the enemy, sir. People have died. More will die if he isn't stopped immediately. Everything is documented on that drive. Communications intercepts, surveillance photographs, financial transactions, the complete chain." Hayes paused. "And that woman being loaded onto the medevac is Lieutenant Arya Lang, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, declared killed in action 3 years ago. She has been operating alone in this sector, protecting American soldiers and gathering the evidence that brought us here. She deserves considerably better than what she received." The general looked at the helicopter for a long moment. His expression was the stone face of a man processing implications he didn't yet fully understand. "I'll review the evidence personally," he said. "If it's what you say it is, heads will roll. But, Commander, there will be a full investigation. Your actions today." "I understand, sir." Hayes met the general's eyes. "I'd rather face a court-martial for doing the right thing than live with doing nothing while soldiers died for someone's profit." The general was quiet for a moment. "Get your team on that bird. You're all flying directly to Germany for medical evaluation and debriefing." He paused. "And Commander, if half of what you say is true, you won't be facing a court-martial. You'll be receiving medals." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Arya Lang was in surgery for 11 hours. Hayes spent most of that time in a waiting area outside the operating theater at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, in a chair that was designed for discomfort, drinking coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a previous decade. His team was scattered through various debriefing rooms, each of them being interviewed separately by military investigators whose tones moved through skeptical, then stunned, then carefully professional as the weight of the evidence accumulated. Morrison was in surgery simultaneously. The flight surgeon had saved the leg, barely, and the prognosis was cautious but increasingly optimistic. He would walk again, the doctors said. He would carry a prosthetic and live with the memory of what it cost him, but he would walk. By the time Hayes was released from his own debriefing 15 hours after landing, the world had changed. Colonel Marcus Vaughn had been placed under arrest 4 hours after their arrival. Gerald Brennan was in federal custody. Rashid Ahmadi had been killed while resisting capture. 3 other senior personnel connected to the intelligence network were being detained and investigated. The news agencies that Morrison had uploaded to had published preliminary stories, and those stories had already reached Congress, where the relevant committees were demanding hearings. Hayes sat in the waiting room and read the news on his phone. He read about the corruption network and the soldiers who had died because of it. He read the first mentions of an unnamed female Marine who had operated alone in hostile territory for 3 years, gathering evidence and protecting American forces. He read the carefully worded official statements and the less carefully worded statements from former colleagues and subordinates of the man who had been arrested. He read until a doctor came to tell him that Arya Lang was out of surgery, critical but stable. That against the odds of 3 years of malnutrition, untreated injuries, and acute combat stress compounded by 2 fresh gunshot wounds and a liver nick, she was expected to live. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Not yet," the doctor said. "But soon." 5 days later, Hayes was finally allowed into the ICU. She was hooked to monitors and fours, smaller in a hospital bed than she had seemed on any ridge, but her eyes were open, and when she saw him, she managed a smile that was thin but genuine. "You look terrible," she said. Her voice was weak but present. "You should see yourself," Hayes replied, pulling a chair to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was shot twice and then operated on by someone who clearly enjoys their work." A pause to gather breath. "Did it work? Did we get them?" "We got them. All of them. Vaughn is awaiting court-martial. Brennan is facing federal charges. The whole network is being dismantled." Hayes looked at her steadily. "And you're being called a hero. Publicly. The whole story is out." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not a hero. I just couldn't let it go." "That's exactly what makes you a hero." Her eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they held the kind of vulnerability that takes enormous effort to display. "What happens to me now?" Hayes had spent the past 5 days asking exactly that question to JAG officers, military intelligence representatives, and Marine Corps liaison personnel. The answer had evolved considerably over that period. Your case is being reviewed under the framework of extreme duress and continued operational service absent command and control. The preliminary determination is that you remained in theater performing your duties despite being cut off and left behind. The Marine Corps is discussing a promotion, not a court-martial. "I don't want a promotion." "Then what do you want?" She was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the German countryside stretched green and impossibly peaceful under an autumn sky. "I want to sleep without checking the shadows," she said finally. "I want to stop seeing rifle scopes when I close my eyes. I want to feel like a person again instead of a weapon." She looked at him. "Is that possible?" Hayes thought carefully before answering. "I don't know. I won't pretend I do. But you have people now, medical support, psychological support, a military that actually has an obligation to take care of you. It won't be easy or fast, but you won't be alone." Something in her expression softened at that. "Not all the way. 3 years of solitude. And betrayal doesn't dissolve in a conversation. But enough. That's going to take some getting used to," she said. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The Marine Corps officially changed Arya Lang's status from killed in action to return to duty. The promotion came through while she was still unconscious, which she found deeply amusing when informed of it. She had been made a captain, she noted, without having the opportunity to respectfully decline. Morrison learned to walk with a prosthetic and maintained his sense of humor throughout rehabilitation with what Hayes privately considered an almost unreasonable level of equanimity. The rest of the SEAL team received decorations in a ceremony that all of them agreed felt more than slightly strange. They had simply been doing their jobs, following a problem to its source, trying to fix something broken in the system. The medals felt like a different language for something that didn't quite translate. Arya was assigned to a training unit in Quantico, teaching new Marine Corps Scout snipers. The Corps had decided, correctly, that her experience was valuable in ways that had nothing to do with conventional operational roles. She reported to her first class with a cane she didn't need anymore but still carried out of habit. Her students looked at her the way young Marines always look at instructors who have become something like legend, with a mixture of awe and the specific uncertainty of people who aren't sure whether to be inspired or intimidated. She recognized the look and addressed it directly. "Snipers operate alone," she told them on the first day. "But you're never really alone. You carry your training and your discipline and your mission. And you carry each other. Every shot you take, every position you hold, you do it knowing that somewhere another Marine is doing the same thing, connected to you through something larger than any individual." She paused, looking at each of them. "Some of you will face situations where the right thing isn't the easy thing, where following orders means compromising your values. In those moments, your first duty is to the Marines beside you and to the oath you swore, not to any particular person, not to any command structure, but to the principles that structure exists to protect." After class, on the first day, she walked to her office and found a package with no return address on her desk. Inside was a photograph, Hayes and his entire team standing on Devil's Tooth Ridge, their faces lit by morning light, a small Marine Corps emblem flag raised between them. On the back, in Hayes's handwriting, "The Ridge remembers." And so do we. She pinned it to the wall beside her marksmanship certificates and a memorial bracelet bearing 3 names. That night, for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, she slept without checking the shadows. 1 year after the operation, Hayes returned to Afghanistan for his final deployment in country. The war was winding down, American forces withdrawing in stages, but there was still work in the security of the retreat. On his last day, he arranged for a helicopter to take him to the remote valley near the Pakistani border. Devil's Tooth Ridge looked different in full daylight, less threatening, more simply desolate. Rock and sand and the endless pale sky of high altitude. Hayes climbed to the highest point and found what someone had left there, an unofficial memorial, unsanctioned and weathered, constructed from flat stones with names scratched into salvaged metal fragments. Reeves, Chen, Washington, Lang, and beneath those names, newer inscriptions. The names of soldiers saved by the ghost sniper during 3 years of solitary vigil. Hayes counted them carefully. 27 names. 27 people who had gone home to their families, who had resumed their lives, who moved through the world without any knowledge of what had stood between them and the alternative. Tucked among the stones was a weathered Barrett M82, a 1-barrel shroud, too damaged for use but preserved as deliberately as any artifact in any museum. A handwritten note in a weatherproof case was attached to it. He read it twice. To any American who finds themselves lost in these mountains, you are not alone. Look for the ridge. Someone is always watching over you. The Marines of Devil's Tooth, 2022 to 2025. Hayes stood there for a long time, in the wind and the silence, thinking about the things people do when no one is watching. About duty that exists without recognition. About the particular kind of courage it takes to keep fighting when you've been abandoned, when you've been officially declared dead, when every rational calculation says you should stop. Arya Lang had spent 3 years in that calculation and had kept fighting anyway. Not for medals or acknowledgement or even, in the end, for justice, though justice had eventually come. She had fought because the work needed doing and she was the only one positioned to do it. That was a kind of integrity that didn't need an audience. As the helicopter lifted off and turned south, Hayes looked down at the valley one last time. In the clear morning light, at the edge of the ridge, he thought he caught a brief flash, sunlight on glass, or perhaps on a rifle scope. He looked again. Nothing. Just rock and sand and a ridge that had become something between history and legend. Back in Virginia, in a classroom that smelled of gun oil and coffee, Captain Arya Lang finished a morning lecture and dismissed her students to their practical exercises. She watched them file out, young, serious, already carrying the beginning of the weight that comes with learning to do this particular work. She thought about what she would tell them tomorrow, about patience and precision and the moral geometry of a decision that arrives in the space between a heartbeat and a trigger pull, about the things that stay with you and the things that eventually, slowly, with enough time and enough support and enough trust rebuilt piece by careful piece, begin to quiet down. She thought about 27 names on a stone memorial in a valley most people would never find. Outside the window, new Marines were training on the fields below, learning ancient disciplines of patience and protection, preparing themselves for places they couldn't yet imagine. Some of them would face what she had faced. Some of them would be asked to make impossible decisions in situations where no good options existed. She hoped, when those moments came, that they would remember what she was trying to teach them. Not just how to shoot, not just how to survive, how to remain, in the deepest sense, themselves. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, the wind moved across Devil's Tooth Ridge in the particular way it always had, cold, clean, carrying nothing but distance. The names on the stones stewed in their silence. The memorial held its vigil. The ridge remembered. And for anyone who looked up at those mountains at the right moment, in the right light, there remained the faintest possibility that something was still watching over the valley below, patient, precise, and faithful to the last.